Montgomery Place on the Hudson River belonged to the Livingston family since the early 1800s. This 1867 map shows the property belonging to Mrs. Coralie Livingston Barton, niece of Janet Livingston. Historic records show that Janet Livingston owned 12 slaves at one point in time, including Sally Schermerhorn and John Gilson, who were legally married before slavery was abolished in 1827. Alexander Gilson was their firstborn. Alexander was given menial gardening tasks as a youngster, but as he progressed in years, so did his curiosity and expertise. He not only became head gardener at the Montgomery estate, but he developed two notable plant variations shown here. In addition to his accomplishments at the Montgomery estate, Gilson became an entrepreneur and a landowner in the town and village of Red Hook. Numerous people gathered at his burial site to pay tribute to him on October 9th, 2021.
Welcome everybody. I think I know everybody here. I'm Elisabeth Tatum, the Executive Director of Historic Red Hook. We're very excited to be unveiling this sign today dedicated to Alexander Gilson. It's a project that's been at least 2 years in the works, if not longer. So in order to introduce the sign and give you some background information, I'm going to pass this off to Myra Armstead, who is a professor of historical studies at Bard. And she's going to tell you about what went into this sign.
Well, this is a wonderful event, and I have to say that as someone who has spent the last 15 years of my professional career dedicated to what I call public-facing history, it's very, very gratifying to see this happening. I have to preach a little bit and just say that I think it's so important for the general public to have as comprehensive an understanding of our nation's past as possible. And I think gaining that understanding helps us to live more ethically in the present and as we move forward. So I was asked specifically to talk about I guess the set of events that led up to this. I'm gonna not do what my kids used to tell me. Don't start at year one. But I would say that there were several public and historical developments from my point of view that eventuated in our connecting with the historic Red Hook and this sign. And some of them were national and don't seem to have anything to do at all at first with this particular event. And some were local at Bard and then, beyond. So starting with myself, in 2005, I started a project that eventuated in my last book, which was a study of James F. Brown, who was a runaway slave from Maryland who ended up in New York, and he gained his freedom in New York around 1830, and he became the master gardener at Mount Julian down in Beacon. Then it was called Fishkill Landing. Somewhere in the middle of that research, there was something in his diary that made me go to an archivist at associated with the John J. Tatum. And he told me that there was someone working on a gardener, another black gardener, at Montgomery Place. He knew I was at Bard, and he wanted me to know this. I contacted those two women, and they were very much beginning their research, and I know what that's like. So I said, okay, I'll leave you alone, and I made a mental note to come back to that and check it out, check out their findings. So then let me start talking about things that were going on nationally. I would say around 2008 or so, I began to notice within the field of history that there was a rise in the field of economic history, of capitalism studies. This was a whole big thing where all of a sudden Harvard's history department was like turning out all of these people who were studying capitalism in new ways, looking at its global development, and certainly within the United States, looking at I don't know, I would say the interconnections among regions in its development. And this had repercussions for the study of slavery. Essentially, what it did was lead people to look at the economic ties that existed across regions with regard to slavery. So now people are starting to look at slavery in the North in new ways. Another thing that was happening in a field that I was trained in, urban history and urban studies, I began to notice actually in the 90s. And this was where a lot of municipalities were hiring historical firms to look at corporations that were headquartered in their cities for their historic ties to slavery, seeking to sort of leverage that information for philanthropy. Okay, these are cities that had very limited budgets, shall we say. And so this was going on, but it was sort of a quiet thing. But as I read about it, it was just fascinating to me to learn about, insurance companies and banking firms and, other kinds of businesses that we would not associate necessarily immediately with antebellum slavery, but which were and had built up assets and as in their parent company forms through slavery. So again, this focus on slavery's long reach into the North and people who were involved. Then Ruth Simmons became the first African American president of Brown University, and one of the first things she did was set up a commission on the study of Brown's involvement in slavery. Now, that was interesting because historians long knew this. I mean, since at least the middle of the 20th century, I certainly learned it, that the Brown brothers were very big in the triangular trade. She just said, let's just see what we can find. And of course, she found a lot. And this then coincided with, all of these things, I do believe in like this historical zeitgeist, things just start happening, percolating. This also paralleled, I should say, the work of a friend of mine who actually was specializing in urban history and stumbled upon an archive that showed that Native Americans and African Americans were used disproportionately in scientific research in the late 18th and early 20th century as the field of biology was developing, and scientists were trying to understand the body. So they would steal these cadavers, and there was this whole intellectual scientific exchange based on these cadavers that was going on between England and the United States, focused on elite universities. So he ended up publishing a book that came out in 2013 called Ebony and Ivy, which was this big expose of the deep involvement and complicity at many levels of Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and other universities in slavery. Finally, so this is all percolating in my head, all right? So 2016, Bard bought Montgomery Place, right? And I thought, oh, this is my opportunity to circle back and pull all of this together. Amy Houston was managing director, and she had already received the archives. And so she knew about Alexander. Also, Amy Perella, who was the head of our horticulture department, was excited to learn about Alexander because of the begonia and his other variety that was named after him. So we collaborated at first in an Engaged Liberal Sciences course that put together an exhibit that appeared in the Red Hook Village Hall, and then eventually got a grant to do a community-focused project, and through Amy connected with Claudine and Historic Red Hook. and we were able to find out quite a bit more about Alexander Gilson and have what we called Gilson Fest. Claudine took things a step further and decided that we should apply to the Pomeroy Foundation, and we thought that was going to be, just really, really easy, because we knew that Alexander was a slave based on when he was born, although we don't know the precise year. It was before 1827. And the Pomeroy people said, whoa, hold up, we don't know. Where we are now is that this sign acknowledges what we do know of him, and his importance as a horticulturalist in the 19th century, generally, and certainly for Red Hook, and then also for the area, because he did own a nursery, and we could say more. But this has inspired ongoing research, and our questions about his status, I think, promise to yield a lot about that transition period when between 1799 and 1827, when the state was moving towards gradual abolition and the status of enslaved people then. So that's the background.
Thank you. Thank you, Myra. Now I'm really excited to announce and have Marcus Molinaro, our county exec, come up and say a couple words.
Oh, well, do
If
you
you'd
mind?
like.
Would you please? I was more here for the history lesson. I appreciate being here, and I do want to say this. I am really here for the history lesson. The truth of the matter is, every day, thanks to the work of organizations like Historic Red Hook, but also to the great work of historians, most notably the second only full-time County historian in the state of New York. Yeah. Dr. Will Tatum, not Truitt, Tatum. I have too many Wills, but Dutchess County was very fortunate to find Will some years ago, and Brad Kendall and I, in appointing and reestablishing the historian position for county government, establishing the full-time position, really wanted all of us to engage in unearthing stories and tales that hadn't been told. Now, I will say, I just finished reading the Ulysses S. Grant biography by Ron Chernow, and I will tell you that there are so many stories that we have simply allowed to slip into history that, frankly, individuals whose tales need to be told. Black, brown, women who often have been overlooked in the telling and retelling of American and even local history. So the fact that we can uncover and talk about the true, rich, and diverse history of this country, both good and bad, is critically important. And just happy to be here. And as a neighbor, I really was interested in finding out what was at the end of my block, or at least 2 blocks over. So thrilled to be here, and thankful to Historic Red Hook and all of you for committing to telling and retelling the story of not only Red Hook, but by extension, America. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, I want to bring up Bill Jeffway, the Executive Director of the Dutchess County Historical Society, to talk a bit about the research process that went into getting the marker.
Thank you. Thanks, Elizabeth. Bill Jeffway, I did a chunk of research on Alexander Gilson, but it was an extraordinary effort. As it may seem a simple thing to have a sign, but it's really a collective effort of a lot of people. But I do want to repeat some points that were made earlier. As much as the sign is the focus of our effort and celebration today, the real hero of the story is Alexander Gilson. And maybe his sister, maybe his wonderful mother, who lived to be 100 and something, at least over 100. And that these stories are well worth being told. And it is sometimes hard to ask questions like, what's Red Hook's relationship with slavery? It can be discomforting or cause some discomfort, but the pursuit of truth generally results in some learning and some insights that can help us be better. And I think one of the reasons that history is so, I have to say, I think it's underappreciated for us struggling for funds and prominence, is that we've tended to focus on facts and shied away from some of the hard parts. So when you ask a question like, what is Red Hook's relationship with slavery? you could learn some very inspiring stories like those of Alexander Gilson or his sister or his mother, people who really persevered in the face of having the odds against them. So I encourage everyone to look for those stories, stories that have been either intentionally erased or passively ignored or rewritten into something else. And there are versions of those three things happening all around us. So Will and I just tested out the QR code here. So and it works. So we hope the sign attracts people, but that they want to learn more about the gentleman Alexander Gilson and his immediate family and what it was like to be black in Red Hook in the days of enslavement. And so the Dutchess County Historical Society, in partnership with the Dutchess County Historian next year, we're publishing our yearbook entirely on untold stories and invisible people. That is the headline that the wonderful Lorraine Roberts, who was head of the Black History Committee for many years, was entitled an article she wrote for the County Historical Yearbook. Invisible People, Untold Stories, story of black history locally. And in that yearbook, we want to tell more stories like those of Alexander Gilson and other blacks. There was a black gentleman, part of the Jackson family, that lived in this house, and he's buried on Turkey Hill Road, misnomered as the burial ground of Chief Crow, which was a fabrication to kind of red wash a black burial ground. And while it's hard to ask questions like, why do we do things like that as a society, how can it not do anything but help us grow if we're honest in pursuit of the truth? So a lot of the history is about the sometimes difficult pursuit of the truth. We invite you to, if you have an interest, suggest how to get involved in telling these stories that are untold or underrepresented. And we'll be working on our yearbook. You can help with that. You can click on the QR code, work with Historic Red Hook. But so I just invite you to see the sign as the gateway to the wonderful stories of the people who persevered against incredible odds.
So before we do the big reveal, I just want to say that this is part of a larger month-long program on cemeteries in Red Hook. Thanks to our researchers, our volunteer researchers, we've have uncovered a lot of stories about not only the people living in this, buried in this graveyard, but also 4 other historic graveyards in the town. So we have some more information on that in our self-guided walking tour on our website. If you find Thea, she's got some handouts with some more information about the residents of this graveyard as well. If I could, I'd like to have Bill and Myra come up to pull the...
To stand by the grave.
Can we unveil the sign?
I didn't know I had to do anything complicated.
That's not true. So we're going to take the picture?
Yeah.
Oh, just pull it off the top?
There isn't a drawstring.
Cameras at the ready.
When the Queen of England does it, there's a drawstring.
Hey, you can take it all the way off.
Okay. Ta-da!